The waiter at a luxury restaurant believed he could get away with insulting a black man who was casually dressed. However, the man's true identity left the entire room in awe. The elegant dining room of the Lexington Terrace, one of the most upscale restaurants in Santa Monica, was filled with the harmonious sound of clinking glasses and soft conversation. The evening was brimming with sophistication, as patrons were dressed to the nines. Costly watches gleamed under warm chandeliers, and the faint aroma of freshly baked sourdough wafted through the air. It was an environment in which appearances appeared to be of significant importance. Elliot Bryant, a 38-year-old tech entrepreneur who had recently closed a multi-million-dollar transaction, entered the building through the polished glass doors. Elliot did not resemble the typical terrace patron, as he was decked out in dark denim, a plain navy polo, and sneakers that had seen better days. He had no desire to impress anyone. Rather, the objective was to relish a tranquil moment of victory and indulge in one of the most exquisite steaks in the area. Elliot observed the crystal-clear white tablecloths and the faintly flickering candles. He was present for the cuisine, not the spectacle. He approached the hostess stand with an unassuming expression and adjusted his watch, which was modest in comparison to the luxury brands that were displayed around him. The hostess, a young woman with neatly pinned hair, greeted him cordially and then scanned the reservation list. "Ah, Mr. Bryant, in this direction." She retrieved a menu and directed him to a comfortable table by the window, which is one of the most desirable locations in the house. The restaurant's ambient hum seemed peculiarly enticing as Elliot sat down. He had spent years ascending the corporate ladder, frequently being the sole black individual in a room filled with suits. He simply desired to unwind and relish the results of his efforts tonight. Nevertheless, a shadow hovered over the table. "Good evening," announced a man who was attired in a black bow tie and a pristine white shirt. His demeanor was acerbic and disapproving. Kyle was the name that appeared on the waiter's name badge. He was tall and lean, and his demeanor was condescending, causing Elliot to slightly erect in his seat. "May I begin by providing you with water?" Elliot responded without hesitation. "Certainly. Please maintain the water." Kyle curtly nodded, but his expression, a flicker of disdain, a clenching around his mouth, suggested an unspoken message. He departed without uttering a word, leaving a minor shiver in his wake. Elliot dismissed it, concentrating on the menu. He was not intimidated by the prices. However, he couldn't help but silently snicker at the absurdity of paying $18 for a side of asparagus. He anticipated indulging in the benefits of his success tonight. Upon Kyle's return with the water, his demeanor had not improved. He applied excessive force to the glass, resulting in a minor spill. "Are you prepared to place an order?" he inquired, his words abruptly ending. "Not yet. May I request an additional few minutes?" Kyle's lips curled into a smile that was scarcely discernible. His tone was tinged with cynicism as he said, "Take your time." Elliot's gaze trailed him as he departed. There was an unsettling quality to the interaction. However, his intention was not to incite a disturbance. He took a swig of water, his attention diverting to the city lights that were visible outside. The night was still in its infancy. However, something was already in the process of forming beneath the polished surface of the evening. Elliot endeavored to overcome the discomfort that had persisted since his initial encounter with Kyle. He reminded himself that his objective was not to analyze attitudes. Rather, it was to enjoy a satisfying meal. However, the lingering sensation of unwelcomeness began to establish itself as the minutes passed. Kyle appeared to have no difficulty attending to the other tables. Elliot observed him effortlessly transition from one visitor to another, his demeanor impeccable and professional. His tone was warm and accommodating, and the pleasantries he offered to the couple at the next table were effortless. However, upon his eventual return to Elliot's table, it appeared as though an entirely different individual had arrived. "Have you made a decision yet?" Kyle inquired, his pen poised over a compact notepad. His voice was as harsh, dismissive, and evidently disinterested as it had been previously. "I will accept the ribeye," Elliot replied, maintaining a composed demeanor. "Served medium rare with garlic mash. Served on the side." Kyle swiftly recorded the order, scarcely lifting his head. "Do you have any other questions?" Elliot requested a glass of the house red. Kyle walked away without uttering a word, sighing gently with just enough volume to be observed. Elliot's gaze traversed the room as he reclined in his chair. A group of well-dressed men laughed noisily a few tables away, attracting the attention of the quieter patrons. The disruption did not appear to trouble their waiter, as he continued to pour wine with enthusiasm and laughed. The contrast was not lost on Elliot. Kyle placed the bread basket on the table with little care when it finally arrived, nearly toppling over Elliot's water glass from the edge of the basket. "Your bread," he said indifferently, before departing once more without uttering another word. Elliot let out a breath. This was not a novel concept. Throughout his existence, he encountered instances similar to this one. Microaggressions, the subtly nagging reminders that certain individuals believed he did not belong, but it was still disappointing. "Is everything in order, sir?" a voice inquired. Elliot's aggravation was interrupted by the hostess's amiable demeanor, as he glanced upward. "Certainly, everything is in order," Elliot replied, attempting to maintain a smile. He did not wish to create any controversy, certainly not tonight. However, the discomfort was intensifying. Additionally, it was not solely him who observed. An elderly woman with silver hair sat at the table adjacent to his, and she gave him a sympathetic look, as if to convey, "I understand the situation." Elliot's forbearance was put to the test by Kyle's every action by the time he returned with the steak. When the wine finally arrived, it was poured carelessly, resulting in a few drips of it spilling onto the pristine tablecloth. The plate was placed on the table with an audible thud. Elliot's mandible was clenched, but he refrained from speaking. "I am grateful," he replied in a level voice. Kyle responded with a firm nod before disappearing into the throng of servers. At the very least, the steak was as flawless as it had been described. Elliot relished the initial bite as he tore into it. However, it was impossible to disregard the tension that hangs in the air. He observed that a few other diners were stealing glimpses at him, their expressions a combination of curiosity and discomfort. A man, who was seated across the room with his family, muttered something under his breath that caused his wife to elbow him in the ribcage. Elliot observed the silent exchange, which concluded with the man shaking his head and turning his gaze away. Elliot then resolved to cease disregarding it. Elliot was not inclined to be affected by minor infractions. However, there was something peculiar about this evening. Elliot determined that it was time to speak up as Kyle continued to avoid eye contact and pass by his table without a second thought. He raised his hand slightly as Kyle passed by once more, dishes expertly balanced on his arm. Elliot's tone was composed and firm as he said, "Pardon me." Kyle halted, his expression rendering it impossible to interpret. "Is that correct?" Elliot stated, "The tablecloth is soiled with wine," pointing to the dark red stain that is situated near his plate. "Could I obtain a napkin or similar item to wipe this mess up?" Kyle briefly examined the stain. Then he shrugged. "It is merely a minor spill. I will dispatch an individual to address the matter." Elliot's eyebrows marginally raised. "That individual would not be you," Kyle abruptly stated. "I am preoccupied," and proceeded to depart. A couple seated at the adjacent table exchanged glances. It is evident that the exchange was witnessed. Elliot noticed the pity in their eyes. However, he was not in the mood for anyone's sympathy. He set down his knife and fork, gazing out the window, attempting to determine whether the meal was even worthwhile. Minutes have elapsed. The table was not cleaned by anyone. His water was not replenished by anyone. His meal was not monitored by anyone. Elliot appeared to have vanished. Elliot once more focused on Kyle, observing him as he adored other settings with a level of attentiveness that was almost charming. When Kyle chuckled at a joke that a patron told, it was extremely loud, sufficient to captivate the entire audience. Elliot steadily exhaled, mentally counting to 5. This was not his initial encounter with such treatment, differently due to his appearance or the assumptions that others made about him. However, the evening was not yet concluded. A manager was observed in close proximity to the kitchen, clipboard in hand. Elliot contemplated communicating with him, however, hesitated. He was informed by an external source. It was not yet appropriate to escalate the situation. Instead, he quickly dispatched a text message using his smartphone. "The service I am receiving at Lexington Terrace tonight is truly remarkable." The response was nearly immediate. "I am located 10 minutes distant. Please refrain from departing." Elliot slightly grinned and placed his phone down. He was uncertain as to whether the message would have any effect. However, he harbored a suspicion that it might. Kyle returned. Elliot consumed his final morsel of steak at that precise moment. "Do you have any other questions?" he inquired with a monotone voice. Elliot acknowledged, "Yes." For the first time that evening, he met Kyle's gaze directly. "I would appreciate receiving the check." Kyle nodded and departed without uttering another word. A few moments afterward, he returned with a compact black leather folder and deposited it on the table. Elliot initiated its operation by opening it. He was unable to ignore the handwritten note, scribbled on the bill's bottom. The dress code is business casual. Please be advised. Elliot's palm became frozen. His eyes scanned the text twice, subsequently 3 times. It was not included in the printed receipt. Kyle had made an effort to incorporate this. The space appeared to be indistinct for a brief period. Each courteous glance, every whispered discourse surrounding the tables, experienced a sense of separation. Elliot slowly closed the container and gazed upward at Kyle, who stood nearby, folding a napkin with an air of indifference. The words were present on the tip of Elliot's tongue. However, prior to his ability to articulate himself, a voice that was well known penetrated the tension with the force of a weapon. The name is Elliot. The entrance was the focal point of attention for all individuals, where a tall man in a crisp, tailored suit entered with a wide smirk. The tide abruptly changed. Elliot turned toward the voice. His lips were adorned with a subtle smile. Nathan Caldwell was approaching him, the proprietor of Lexington Terrace, additionally, a companion of considerable duration. Nathan's demeanor was authoritative, mid-40s, confident without being arrogant, and an individual who had constructed his restaurant into one of the most exclusive locations in the metropolis. Nathan approached the table with his arms extended. "I was unaware that you were arriving tonight," he exclaimed. Elliot was swiftly drawn into a hug. "You ought to have contacted me. I would have reserved the entire location for you." Nathan's demeanor was characterized by a sense of comfort and familiarity, attracted the attention of the entire classroom. Kyle, who had been standing in the vicinity, abruptly became rigid. As he came to terms with the situation, his complexion turned paler. Elliot laughed. "I didn't want to bother you, Nathan. I figured I would simply enter, celebrate in silence, and enjoy a delicious meal." Nathan produced a faint frown as he glanced at the table. "Silently, you say. What is the reason for the discoloration on the tablecloth? Also, where is your wine refill? Kyle, what is the reason for the lack of appropriate attention to this table?" Kyle was rendered speechless as he struggled to articulate his thoughts. I thought." Nathan's acute gaze fixed on him. "What did you think?" The entire room appeared to suspend its breath. Nathan's tone was composed. However, there was an undeniable edge to it. Elliot extended his hand, his demeanor measured. "Nathan, it is all right. There was a minor glitch in the service tonight." Hiccup. Nate's pupils contracted. "I do not permit hiccups in my restaurant, particularly not for an individual such as yourself." He returned to Kyle. "Are you even aware of the identity of this individual?" Kyle forced himself to inhale forcefully. His attention alternated between Nathan and Elliot. He did not introduce himself. Kyle murmured in a feeble voice. Nathan's laughter was brief and devoid of amusement. "Can he provide an introduction?" "Allow me to introduce him to you. Hi, I am Elliot Bryant. Elliot Bryant. Bryant Tech Solutions was established by its founder. You are aware of the organization that altered the course of events. How are logistics managed by businesses? An individual whose benevolence has provided funding. There are more community programs than I can enumerate." Kyle's complexion was devoid of color. The other patrons began to converse among themselves in a whisper. Their gaze shifted toward Elliot, with a newfound sense of recognition. Nathan had not yet completed his task. "In addition, I would like to include the following. He is not merely a customer tonight. He is one of my closest companions. Therefore, Kyle, please inform me, what is the specific manner in which you have been treating him?" Kyle's jaw fluctuated in response to his surroundings, resembling a fish in a fish tank. However, no words emerged. Elliot, perceiving the increasing tension, looked directly at Kyle as he reclined back in his chair. His voice was composed, yet it conveyed an undeniable gravitas. "Kyle, it is not about my status as your friend's guest. Your differential treatment of me is the issue. The instant I entered. The inquiry is, what is the rationale behind this?" A hush descended upon the chamber. The mere clinking of glasses appeared to induce a delay. Nathan's focus was unwavering as he folded his arms. "Well, Kyle, I am anticipating an explanation." Kyle struggled to speak. There was an absolute breakdown in his professionalism. I did not intend. It was not personal. I vow. I was merely considering, Elliot's tone became more incisive as he interjected. Exactly. You entertained the notion. You observed my attire, and formed assumptions. Is that accurate? Kyle's silence was sufficient. Nathan's expression became increasingly stern. This behavior is unacceptable at my establishment. Not from anyone, particularly not from an individual who represents it. Kyle, we will discuss this matter in private after this. However, you are currently being excused from the evening. Proceed. Kyle hesitated, but Nathan's expression rendered it impossible to argue. He walked away, disappearing into the kitchen, his head bowed and his hands quivering. Nathan's expression was one of regret as he returned to Elliot. I am so sorry, Elliot. This is intolerable, and I will ensure that it never occurs again. Elliot's voice remained firm, despite the fact that he offered a small smile. Nathan, it is not solely about me. If it can occur to me, it can also occur to another individual. It is impossible to permit individuals of that nature to be employed here. Nathan gave a solemn assent. You are correct. I assure you that I will improve. The room, which had been silent during the exchange, now appeared to be breathing once more. Patrons began to murmur, their expressions evoking a combination of admiration for Elliot's composure, curiosity, and remorse. However, the evening was not about Elliot's vindication. It was about a much more significant matter. Nathan directed another waiter to Elliot's table as Kyle disappeared into the rear. The new server was the complete opposite of Kyle. He was attentive, polite, and visibly anxious to rectify the evening's previous errors. Nathan offered to provide Elliot with a fresh tablecloth and an additional glass of wine at no cost. He also extended a reassuring hand to his shoulder. Anything you require tonight is at your disposal. Elliot dismissed it with a subtle headshake. Nathan, I am grateful. However, this is not a matter of a tablecloth stain or a spilled glass of wine. Nathan steadily nodded, comprehending the significance of Elliot's words. Then let us rectify the situation, not only for you, but for all individuals who enter that door. The restaurant's murmurs intensified as the staff scrambled to reposition the table. Certain patrons appeared markedly uncomfortable, which may have been indicative of their own biases. Others appeared bashful, their eyes darting away as Elliot's gaze traversed the room. Elliot's voice cut through the tension like a sharp blade, as he quietly stated, I did not come here to cause a scene. However, it is possible that this scene was necessary. There is an excessive number of individuals who enter establishments such as this, and emerge feeling as though they are not welcome, as though they are being scrutinized from the moment they enter. Nathan's eyebrows furrowed. You are correct. And that is not the type of establishment in which I wish to operate. It commences with the obligation to hold individuals accountable, and I shall do so. The elderly woman who had observed Kyle's behavior earlier stood and approached Elliot's table from across the room. She smiled graciously as her silver hair glistened in the light of the chandeliers. Mr. Bryant, she said, her voice soft but steady, I apologize for intruding, but I want to express my profound admiration for your grace tonight. A situation that would have caused the majority of individuals to erupt was handled with dignity by you. Elliot smiled briefly. I am grateful, madam. I believe that dignity is the only asset we possess at times. I will not allow anyone to take that away from me. Her eyes were flooded with emotion as she nodded. I simply wanted to inform you that my husband and I will be paying closer attention to your work. I am grateful for the lesson you provided tonight. Others in the restaurant began to gently applaud as she returned to her seat. The space was inundated with an unexpected sense of camaraderie, as the cacophony intensified. Nathan's expression was a combination of pride and regret as he turned to Elliot. My friend, you have provided me with a wealth of material to contemplate this evening. I am responsible for more than just a contrition. Elliot raised his hand to prevent him. Nathan, I am not seeking favors. I merely implore you to exercise your morality. That commences with guaranteeing that this establishment is inclusive of all individuals, regardless of whether they are dressed in a suit or footwear. Nathan concurred. You have my assurance. Kyle will be held accountable for his actions. This restaurant's reputation is not worth maintaining an individual who is incapable of treating others with fundamental respect. Elliot was convinced by Nathan's sincerity. However, he was also aware that this was not solely about one server or a single night. It was about the broader perspective, the subtle, enduring biases that so many individuals encounter on a daily basis. Elliot rose from his seat and placed his napkin on the table. I am grateful, Nathan. While tonight was not flawless, it was nonetheless significant. The entire room appeared to be observing him as he made his way toward the exit. Their previous curiosity was supplanted by admiration. It is possible that some of them would depart tonight with a different perspective on the world and their role within it. However, for Elliot, it was not about being admired. It was a matter of visibility. Elliot emerged into the chilly evening air. His mind is still ablaze with the events that transpired within. When he reached the sidewalk, he halted, gazed upward at the Lexington Terraces illuminated sign. For many years, this location had served as a representation of exclusivity and luxury. However, it had evolved into something more tonight, a reminder of the potential for even the most impeccable facades to conceal imperfections. Nathan joined him outside a few moments later. His demeanor was sincere. Elliot, he initiated. His palms were buried deep within his pockets. I would like to conclude by expressing my final sentiment. You should not have been required to endure any of that. I am not present. Not anywhere. However, you managed the situation in a manner that I am uncertain I could have. Elliot's demeanor ameliorated as he addressed him. Nathan, the issue is not whether or not you handle it more effectively or less effectively. It is about ensuring that the subsequent individual does not have to manage it. That is the change I wish to observe. Nathan hesitantly nodded, the weight of Elliot's words settling upon him. I assure you I will improve. This time for genuine. Nathan's shoulder was grasped by Elliot. Very well, for the simple reason that this is not solely about your restaurant. It pertains to the type of environment in which we aspire to reside. Nathan returned to the interior. Elliot retrieved his phone and composed a message. The celebration I had in mind for tonight did not transpire. However, it served as a reminder of the significance of the ongoing struggle for respect. The reply was received almost immediately. I am proud of you, sir. Tomorrow we should commemorate the occasion appropriately. Elliot cracked a faint smile. He reinserted the phone into his pocket. He commenced his stroll down the tranquil street. He was followed by the distant hum of the city's noises. He was aware that the evening had had an effect on him. Not exclusively on him, however, on all those who had observed it. Upon returning to the restaurant, standing in the center of the dining room, Nathan addressing his employees, he spoke with a composed yet unwavering tone. The events that transpired tonight will never occur again. I am not present, not within my residence. We will improve. Kyle, on the other hand, his termination was abrupt and irrevocable, sent an unambiguous message that prejudice was not tolerated in an organization that prioritized excellence. The evening was not about retribution for Elliot, or setting an example for others. It was about a more profound matter, the subtle influence of standing erect in the presence of disrespect, and demonstrating that dignity could not be taken away. The lesson was evident, regardless of the context, and it was not solely for Kyle or Nathan. It was intended for all individuals. Assumptions are hazardous. Appearances should never be the basis for respect. As the city lights blinked in his direction, Elliot exited with his head held high, being aware that he had rectified an instance of injustice into an opportunity for instruction. Additionally, for those who observed, it was an evening they would not soon forget. In a world where appearances frequently overshadow character, we should opt to lead with respect and compassion. Treating an individual with respect is free of charge. However, the repercussions can endure for an eternity. If you have ever encountered an event similar to Elliot's, or if this narrative resonates with you, please leave a comment below. Additionally, please remember to like and share, and subscribe to receive additional narratives that motivate transformation.